Our starting point is Genesis. We are made in the image of God, and God has emotions. He has anger, wrath. We see the Spirit was grieved. God is pleased. We see that Jesus wept. Jesus was troubled in spirit. He experienced angst, and he had anger. And so we see that the triune God wasn't stoic and unaffected, and he didn't let his emotions take over and control what he did. But his emotions reveal to us who he is and what's important to him. So it's critical to understand that our emotions are part of who God made us to be, who he created us to be. And as image bearers, we reflect that. So there is a purpose. He created us with emotions for a purpose. There's a purpose and a reason for our emotions. So what is the role or function? Emotions reveal what's important to us. I'm going to briefly talk about Jesus at Lazarus' tomb in John 11. So Lazarus died, and they called Jesus to come, and Jesus waited a couple days, and then he came. And when he came, Mary and Martha were there. And so in verse 33 it says, when Jesus saw her, Mary, weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved. He was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. So what do we see? We see that the Prince of Peace was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. He was affected. In verse 35, it says that he wept. What's implied is that he was sad. So when Jesus sees us affected, it affects him. The Savior of the world sees and is affected by your pain. And he doesn't turn away from the wounds of the wounded. He enters in. That doesn't mean that he takes away the source of the pain. Rather, he enters in and helps you in the midst of them. So the fact that he has emotions communicates care. He cared about Mary and Martha. We see that he loved Lazarus, and he weeps because we are affected by the fallen, broken world, and that death is a part of our experience. So emotions reveal that something is important to us. Something that we love or value is somehow in play. So I'm going to go over kind of the four, we'll call them prime emotions. We have happy. So when I'm happy, I'm getting or keeping something that I want. I'm getting invited to the party. We get to go to Disneyland. This boy or girl, they asked me out. When I'm sad, I'm losing or not getting something that I love or value. Maybe I'm not invited to the party. This person didn't ask me out, they asked somebody else out. My parents are getting divorced, or my friend betrayed me. I'm losing something that I value. Fear, something that I love or value or cherish, is somehow in danger or at risk. So maybe mom and dad are fighting, and the stability of the home, which is important to me, is in danger or at risk. Maybe there's a cancer diagnosis. The health and well-being of somebody I love is at risk. So anger, something I love or value or cherish, is being withheld, or there's an injustice happening. So I want to go out with my friend, I want to go to the party, and my parents are saying no. So the thing that I want is being withheld, and I feel like it's not fair, that there's an injustice. So it might be difficult to even name the emotion that we're feeling, and one event can be the source of multiple emotions, or we can act angry, but really we're protecting ourselves because we're sad. I think about, how we don't experience emotions just kind of in neat categories. It's a conglomeration. So it might be difficult to even know what the emotion is that we're feeling, and that creates a challenge. So if we can't name it, and then do we do the work to find out what is the value or the thing at play that I love, that I value, that I treasure. And that sometimes takes a lot of time, and it might even take somebody else helping. So oftentimes, instead of being curious and patient with ourselves, and knowing that we actually have permission and it makes sense that we're affected, we end up spending all of this time trying not to be affected. We maybe ignore how we're feeling, or we distract ourselves, we minimize, we deny, maybe we get addicted to something, we try to numb the pain, because the reality is we also experience emotions physiologically. There was a study done that when somebody stepped on a nail, there's a portion of their brain that lit up, and that same part of the brain lit up when people were experiencing emotional pain. So it's painful. We want to do anything that we can avoid it or get out of it. And so what ends up happening, though, is the message to ourselves, either from ourselves or from others, is don't be affected that way, or don't be affected at all. And that's contradictory to our image-bearing nature, and that's not what the call of Scripture is. So, the one thing that we don't do, or we don't want to do, is to name the emotion and to listen to what it's telling us. And we try to do all these other things, and we end up getting stuck. And when we avoid doing the work, we actually don't learn or grow in processing and experiencing painful emotions. And in Scripture, we don't see Jesus deny or minimize his emotions or the emotions of others. He gives himself space and others space to be affected. Emotions always tell us the truth about what we believe and value. And here's the thing. What we believe might not be true, but our emotions are highlighting what we believe. They're telling us the truth. They're telling their language to us about something that we believe and something that's important to us. So why don't generally people like emotions, and how do we respond to them? So emotions expose our vulnerabilities. They show others that we can be affected, and we often view being affected as being weak, and I don't want to be weak. I don't want you to know that things that affect me, something that you said or did, I experience it and it affects me. So when something negative happens, we may say stuff like, I don't care, it's fine, I'm okay, it doesn't matter. But the truth is, we do care. It's not fine, I'm not okay, and it does matter. And so when we verbally say something that's contradictory to what is true, there's going to be problems. We're not living in ways that are congruent with who God made us to be, with ways that are congruent with what's true. And so eventually, we're going to pay the cost for that. And we can't heal or change something that we don't acknowledge. Unexpressed emotions won't go away. They're going to remain inside, and they're going to come out at some point. It may be years later, and it's going to be uglier. So when we're not honest with ourselves, it's going to affect our mental health. It's going to affect our spiritual health. It's going to affect our relationships, both with God and others. Because if I can't be honest with myself about how I feel and what I value, how am I going to be honest with others or with God? If I'm not honest, how can I have healthy and trusting relationships? And if I'm not honest, how can other image bearers bring help and comfort if I'm not going to acknowledge something that's affecting me? So it's more painful, and it takes courage and strength and time to name emotions and to grow in self-awareness. And it isn't natural to look at and verbalize realities about ourselves. God has not given you a spirit of fear, but one of power, love, and discipline. And so we can do it. He will help us. So, what does God invite us to do? This is where I get to use the whiteboard. Okay. So I'm here. And where is here? Something has happened, so I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm confused. And I don't want people to necessarily know this, but maybe. But I want to be over here. And where is here? Maybe it's happy, there's peace, everything's getting along. So I do a lot of things, either ignore, because this is painful, ignore or get out of feeling this. And I'm trying to get over here. But here's the thing. Why am I here? I'm being affected by living in and navigating a fallen, broken world. So there is death. There's broken relationships. There's betrayal. So being affected this way makes sense. Being affected this way with all of this isn't congruent. If there's death and I'm just happy and peace, that's not living in reality. So what does God ask us to do? What is he inviting us to? He's actually inviting us to engage with him. So we look at the Psalms. God invites us to lament the things that are worthy of lamenting. He invites us to rejoice in the things that are being made new. He invites us to yearn for the day when all things will be made right. But we're living in this already not yet. And so he invites us to engage. Psalm 88, it's this psalm it's dark. And it ends with, "And darkness is my closest friend." So he gives us words to verbalize what it is like for us. So I'm going to end by actually doing this. I'm going to spend a couple minutes and we're going to pray. I'm going to ask God a couple of questions, so it might be silent for a couple of minutes or a little bit, and then I'll wrap us up. God, we live in a fallen, broken world, and we're affected by it, and we need help. And your word says that you will help. It's hard to acknowledge that we're affected, or it's even hard to acknowledge the things that we value. And so God, right now, you know the ways in which each person in this room is affected by something going on in their life, personally. Nothing escapes your gaze. And just like you saw Mary and Martha, and you were affected, God, right now, will you speak? God, what would you say to them about how you see them and how you feel about them? And God, if there's a lie that they're believing, will you bring that to their mind? Will you reveal that to them? Whether it's about you or a situation. And God, what is the truth? What would you say to them about that lie? God, thank you for your word. And we know your word is living and active. Thank you for your spirit. And thank you for Jesus. Amen.
We guys thank Vicki. All right, here's what we're going to do. 1 minute, I want you to turn to the person on the right or left and just say one takeaway that you got from the talk. And then I got another question for you. 1 minute, go ahead.
So thank you, Vicki, for doing such a wonderful introduction on the value of our emotions and how God really designed us in such a wonderful, unique way. That's kind of where I'm starting with this first point, is that in God's good design, He designed us to be people that function as an interconnected whole. We're made of bodies, minds, and souls. All of those parts are interconnected, and so when everything is functioning as it should, that's wonderful, but when things are not going as they should in the fall, every part of us is affected. And so when Adam sinned, we all sinned with him, and that affects our bodies, minds, and souls altogether. Mental illness falls into that framework of our brokenness and one of the curses of the fall. The good news is in Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, we're new creatures in Him. And so that's the good news. But as you guys know, we're still living in a fallen world, and so we're dealing with all of the trappings of sin and disease and death in our lives now. As we're living in this time of God's kingdom being here but not fully realized, we can look forward to being in the new heavens and the new earth when there's no more death and disease. And what's amazing is that God invites us now to start to push back those effects of the fall. And so that's one of the areas I see, hopefully in my role, is trying to help people push back those effects of disease and brokenness in their lives. Can you go to the next slide, please? So just to reiterate this again, when we're thinking about mental health problems in light of the fall, again, God made us in His good design to be an integrated whole of body, mind, and soul. And all of those parts affect all of the others. So our physical, emotional, and spiritual selves are all integrated. When we have mental health problems, again, if one part is affected, the other parts are usually affected too. So our thoughts affect our bodies can affect our thoughts, and then our spiritual selves play a role in that as well. When we're looking at trying to pursue health and wellness, we want to think about helping somebody in all of those areas as part of their treatment. In the church, I'm sure some of you guys experience, there's a lot of misconceptions about what mental illness is. Sometimes we just chalk it up to that person just doesn't have enough faith. If I only had enough faith, I wouldn't struggle with fear. I wouldn't struggle with feeling sad. Or it's just a sin problem. That's the only cause of this depression or anxiety I'm feeling. And those are misconceptions, but they're common, so it's good to be aware of those. Can you go to the next one, please? So this is a big topic. I don't have time to go into details on all of the various mental health problems. You guys know about probably some basics about depression and anxiety. There's schizophrenia, ADHD, OCD, post-traumatic stress disorder, eating disorders, personality disorders, addiction, lots of stuff. The basics boil down to these are all problems in which somebody is really having difficulty with their functioning. And that's kind of one of the basic takeaways I want you guys to have. We all, as Vicki illustrated well, God designed us with emotions. Emotions are good. But when someone is at the point that they can no longer function, they can't get out of bed, they can't go out with their friends, they can't show up for their job or get their homework done, where it's really affecting their day-to-day functioning and they can't really keep it together, that's where we list something as, okay, this is now developed into a mental health problem that's significant, where you really are not able to function well. There's a lot of contributing factors and causes. It's not a simple cause. So there are things in your brain that could not be working as they should be. We have different theories of what causes mental illness, sometimes there are chemicals that are out of balance. There can be genetic factors, there are lifestyle factors, whether you're exercising or not exercising, whether you're using drugs or alcohol. There's a lot of factors with that. The way that you're raised and just kind of what you're learning from the way that your parents cope with stress that will affect your own mental health. And then stress plays a role too. Things are getting kind of worse year by year here in the West with mental health. There's several reasons for that probably, but this is an important topic because suicide in your age group is the second leading cause of death here in the United States. You can go ahead and go to the next one. So how do you know if you need help? Again, all of us experience some of these emotions frequently, so how do you know when to be concerned for yourself? Suicidal thoughts, and those, I should clarify, that's when these thoughts are serious. You are feeling like you don't want to be living anymore, and you're actually thinking about how you would do that, making a plan to do it. When those thoughts are serious, that's an emergency. Or if you're having thoughts of really wanting to seriously hurt somebody else. Psychosis is when your brain is not really registering reality. You might be believing things that are really untrue, and there's a lot of different examples with that, or you may be hearing things that nobody else is hearing, and so that can be very serious and that can be an emergency. Or severe self-harm, which is not always suicidal, but if someone you know or yourself, if you're really injuring yourself with cutting or something like that, that could be an emergency. When emotions are really completely out of whack, when you're all the way over here and you cannot function. And then timeline matters too. So we all go through stressful events. We may have expected sadness and fear, but when those symptoms are affecting your whole body and are lasting for several weeks and you can no longer really function normally, that's a sign that you may need to seek some help. And then trauma, that's something you really do need to process with a counselor. And addiction is another area where you just can't do it on your own. You need to seek some help. How do you get help? This first point is a no-brainer, but start by talking with an adult you trust. That might be your parent, that might be your pastor, might be a teacher. So you don't want to do this alone. You want to talk to somebody in your life that you trust and get their perspective and help. Counseling is often a really good place to start. Not everybody needs to see a doctor and consider medication. So counseling, I would say, is a good place to start. A doctor like myself might be recommended at some point for medication evaluation. If you or a friend are having some of those severe symptoms we talked about, suicidal thoughts, psychosis, disconnected from reality, homicidal thoughts, that's when you want to call 911, go to the emergency room. There's also an Arizona crisis line and a national crisis line for suicide. How do you help a friend? Similar advice. You don't want to go at this alone, especially if your friend is having some severe suicidal thoughts. You want to talk with another adult and get some help. Don't feel like this is something you should be managing on your own with your friend. Listening and being a support can be really helpful. Offering to pray with them, praying for them. You may sometimes be in a situation where you need to call 911 on your friend's behalf. Hopefully you won't be in that situation, but you may be. And remind your friend they're not alone. You're with them, God is with them, God cares, He's present. I'm just going to touch on this really briefly. We've talked about it a little bit already, Self-harm can be a lot of different things. I'm sure you guys have possibly had friends or even yourselves who are struggling with this. It's not always suicidal. Sometimes people cut themselves or burn themselves or do other things like that to try to feel something. It's a way of managing their emotions. It's not a healthy way to do it, but it's a way that some people are doing it. Some people do it really trying to end their lives. So again, this isn't your responsibility to figure that out, but again, you want to involve an adult in the conversation, let them know what's happening so you're not dealing with this on your own, either for yourself or for a friend. And you can ask more detailed questions of your friend to try to figure out, is this really serious, or are you just trying to injure yourself? What's another way you can cope with the pain that you're feeling? And then how can you help yourself avoid mental health problems? Or if you're struggling now, what can you do to help yourself? The biggest piece of advice I have is actually exercise. So there's a very strong connection between improving your physical and mental well-being with exercise. So probably most of you are in a time of life where you get a lot of exercise, which is great. So keep that habit up as you're getting older. Spending time outdoors, just enjoying nature and God's beautiful creation helps us lift our perspective up. And then being connected with people who are going to speak truth in your life, who will love you. That sense of community is so important. Spiritual health, disciplines, prayer, quiet time, reading the word, all of those things. And then getting your perspective off of yourself. Serve others. That is really, really helpful too for us. Avoiding alcohol and drugs. Marijuana is included in that. Marijuana really can cause a lot of negative effects, especially in your age group where your brain is still developing. And then limiting social media makes a big difference too. So the takeaways today is that mental illness is a real thing. It affects all parts of us, bodies, emotions, thoughts, our hearts. As we're trying to come alongside each other in these struggles, one of the things that's helpful is if we remember that we're God's image bearers, and just the diversity of who we are reflects God's beauty. Hold on to the promises of Jesus. He's never going to leave you or forsake you. You're not alone. We're all in this together. And then be a listening ear for those who are hurting. Thankfully, God is in the business of making us new. When we are weak, He is strong. So I'm so thankful for that. Thank you, guys.
All right. Let's take a deep breath, huh? That's a lot of content for us to kind of consume, and a lot of stuff for us to feel, especially in the past 30 minutes, and even some of us maybe have been thinking a lot about this night in general. So maybe just a quick deep breath from a lot of us. Let it in, let it out. Yeah, very good, very good. Well, over the past few weeks, I've thought a lot about what I can be sharing with y'all tonight. I chose to write out my thoughts because I tend to get sidetracked and I tend to lose my train of thought a lot. But you'll have to forgive me if I end up reading a majority of my portion of my content today. I really do want to try and stick to as close as what I intended to share today with you guys. So I want to start off with some statistics. I took these from the National Alliance of Mental Illness website. 1 out of every 6 youth ages 6 to 17 will experience some type of mental health disorder each year. And 51% of youth with a diagnosable mental health condition will reach out for professional help in a year. Now, I share these statistics because mental health affects all of us. You've either experienced it yourself, you will experience it, or you may know somebody who has. And that's okay. The thing about that is that we can take courage in that we're not alone. But here's the wild part. The average delay between onset of mental illness symptoms and treatment is 11 years. So why is it so hard for us to ask for help? I want to focus my time on how to support those around you. We've heard amazing content from Vicki and Liz. This portion is about how we can be a support. We don't need to look at those statistics to know that the people around us are dealing with all kinds of things like anxiety, struggling with self-worth, wrestling with their identity, having suicidal thoughts, trauma, depression. And that's real. If you're comfortable, raise your hand if you or someone close to you has experienced or is experiencing something that I just listed in the past year. You have the freedom to look around too. When we talked about that at the very beginning, the impact of that is to feel that within this conversation, we're not alone. So if you were here a few months ago, Berger, that's Berger. Berger, you raise your hand. Berger shared a powerful message from the book of John about Jesus' interaction with a woman at a well. And I don't have time to go too far in depth on this story, but I would encourage you to take time to read it for yourself this week and truly focus on how Jesus interacts with the woman. In the book of John, we get a story about Jesus heading back from Galilee to Judea, and he stops at a well to take a break where he encounters a woman. Let me read just a portion of it. It's in John chapter 4, verses 6 through 9. So Jesus, wearied from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." She was from Samaria and Jesus was from Nazareth, a Jew. And at this time in history, the Jewish people looked down on Samaritans and didn't interact with them. There was a precedent of racism going on here. She was a woman and he was a man. There are some gender roles going on there. And even having a conversation with her was a big deal. We find out that she had 5 husbands and currently was living with a man that she wasn't married to. And Jesus let her know that she was welcome, that she was being seen, and she was heard. It also appears in this story like she's drawing water at the well alone. Traditionally, women would have drawn water together much earlier in the day, and this woman may have been alone because she felt judged. She may have felt judged by being a bit of an outcast among her own people. So what do we have? She's alone. She has relationship issues. She's ashamed. She's looked down upon. It sounds kind of familiar from the beginning when we talked. Self-worth. I almost tripped. Self-worth. Identity. Maybe depression. Anxiety. Those things sound familiar. We can assume that she was going through some stuff. And what does Jesus do? The thing is that we don't always get all the little details of every interaction that happens in Scripture. What we know is that he was sitting. Maybe just like here in these chairs. He was sitting at a well and he struck up a conversation with this woman. Now, do you think that she knew he was the Savior of the world immediately? Or was it maybe the way that he cared? Maybe it was the way that he spoke, the way that he listened to her, that made her realize who she was speaking with. Jesus is the model for how we help people that are struggling with mental health issues. If you want to know how to help, how to support those around you, read into the details of what Jesus did and how he interacted with everyone. Even the smallest things, like maybe how he stopped and listened. Not just in this story of the woman at the well, but in all the gospel stories. Here's one thing that I think, among many things, one thing that I think Jesus was incredible at, and that we can all learn from. This is as hard for me as it is for you, I think. The awkward silence. The silence in listening and the silence in relationship. He was okay with awkward silence. Jesus was fully present. He knew who he was speaking with, and he was an incredible listener. So how can you support those around you? Maybe the easiest answer is simple: being a listener. How do you help others? Maybe the easiest answer is simple: try and be a great listener. In a world that's distracted by everything, be intentional about making others feel seen. I might make an Instagram post with that saying later, put like a dope image on it. Here's a few things to consider for all of us as we try and become better listeners and be better supports for the people around us. Be available in life. Don't live a life that's distracted by the things that aren't people. People were important to Jesus. People should be important to us. Be available in life. Be available to the people around you, and be ready to give your time. Be okay with just being a listener. Don't be the one that's sharing this story. Don't be the one that, when I'm speaking, I'm interacting with you, and I see in your face that you just want me to stop talking so that you can start talking. Be okay with just being a listener. Be compassionate. Don't look down on someone or judge them for what they may be going through. Anxiety, depression, and mental health can be difficult for people to explain because oftentimes it doesn't fully make sense to the person experiencing it. Try not to be dismissive of what people tell you that's affecting them. It's not small to them, and we're not called to make people feel small. Lastly, you don't have to have all the answers. That's a big deal. You don't have to have all the answers. Sometimes people aren't looking for answers anyways. Sometimes we just want a safe place where we're heard. Many times people want to know that they're seen and that you care. You reflect Jesus. You're not Jesus, and that's good news. If you find yourself in a heavy conversation with a friend about their mental health, maybe try and think about taking it up. Like to someone who's up in age, up in maturity, up in education or skill set, up to a professional, take it up to Jesus. You don't have to take on the weight of these conversations. There's freedom in that statement. There are professionals and people in place who can help make real change. Maybe instead of trying to have the right answers, we can all work on asking better questions, letting people try and share their perspective and their story. A forefather of mental health named Carl Rogers said, "Deep understanding, I believe, is the most precious gift one can give to another." The best way you can try and understand someone is to maybe sit and listen with them. The best way to help someone in need might be to sit and listen to them, to help them feel seen. That's immediate. You can walk out of here today and be intentional about giving space to others and trying to listen. A while ago, I created a game that's built around asking better questions to those I don't fully know yet, and to help me grow closest to the people around me that mean so much to me. The game is about asking questions and taking time to listen to responses. It's called Yahweh, which stands for You Are Worth It. And as a reminder for us to strive to be better at being more like Jesus, caring for those around us, and asking better questions, I want y'all to have one card to keep. Each card has a random question on it that I hope leads you into a deeper conversation with those around you and gives you an opportunity to be a better listener. Thanks.
All right, if you guys have questions, I'm going to get us going a little bit with some questions we talked about earlier. I I feel like, Vicki, you answered a lot of my questions about, like, for instance, I would not consider myself someone who's struggled with mental health. Although, if I look at my emotions and I say, like, do I grieve? Yes. Do I get sad? Deeply sad. Do I get anxious? Very anxious. You know, lots of different things as a father, as a husband, as a pastor, create all sorts of emotions in me. So one of my questions was like, when does that become something that those aren't just normal emotions that Jesus had, grieved, but when do we need to get help? So this was like my number one question, and I think you answered it, and your answer was, when I can no longer function normally, like getting out of bed becomes hard, going to school becomes hard, and you said that's when you called it an emergency.
Yeah, it's an emergency if you're having serious suicidal thoughts, wanting to hurt somebody else, disconnected from reality, or really harming yourself. But Brian is right on track. It's when you really can't function very well anymore. I mean, it's ideal if you can get help before you're in the place where you really can't function. But that's the kind of the sign that you should be watching for. And also, I think with what Vicki shared, your emotions are telling you what's important to you. And so sometimes there are some beliefs that are deep-seated. And most of us have these kind of beliefs that may be inaccurate, may not really reflect God's truth. And so that's something. When your emotions are really out of whack, many times you have those deep-seated beliefs that are not really helping you, that are not consistent with God's truth, that you should seek help for and work with a counselor on.
Did you guys want to add anything? I can come on.
Yeah, I would say, is this on? Can you hear me? When we, think about like emotions like if you drive a car and there's a dashboard and like the check engine light comes on, if we ignore that and just whatever, eventually it's going to get worse. And so like taking the time to be like, what is my anxiety? So like your question, kind of when does it go, let's use anxiety for example, from I'm just feeling anxious and there's just normal anxiety. Maybe I'm a little bit anxious because I'm going to give a presentation. There's normal nervousness to when does it become it affects how I function. And so even for me personally, there was a time when I struggled with generalized panic, and I couldn't leave the house. So I couldn't function in a normal capacity. And just like what Spencer was saying, is like from the onset to kind of when we get help, is the average is 11 years, And so why isn't it that we don't seek help sooner? I think we think, I can handle it, I can manage it, it's not a big deal. Instead of taking the time to be like, there's help out there.
That's great. All right, so this is one of the questions, and maybe I'll direct this towards Spencer. So when your friend is in a mental health struggle and you feel like you want to enter into that, and you want to be there for them, is there ever an appropriate time to get out of the relationship? So you have a responsibility to love this person, and yet it feels like it's almost sucking you into the struggle yourself.
Yes. This works. Great. A few things. I think that right off the bat, boundaries are appropriate and okay. It's okay and it's appropriate for us to be able to establish boundaries within our relationships and especially in this space within mental health. And then the other piece to that is I think part of what I referenced in my talk was maybe trying to point somebody up and being able to have the ability to hand that off or to be able to walk with that person to another individual that might be able to help that person. so that there's not the feeling of a direct cut or an end in a relationship or an interaction.
Okay, a lot of great questions, and then a lot of nonsense, to be honest. So, if you're filling up the phone with a bunch of silly questions that don't mean it, please stop, because it's hard to read through. Okay, this is a helpful one, I think. How do you know, so you enter into the struggle with somebody, and there's empathy, right? And like there is a bond that happens when you join into somebody's struggle. You're empathizing, and then when you try to give advice for like maybe how can we take steps to get out of the hole, you get shut down. So it's almost like someone is not ready to get help. They just want to be in it. And maybe that's not fair to say they want to be in it, but they're not ready to receive any help in getting out of it. They just want you to empathize with where they're at. Any advice on, and this has to do with friends helping friends.
I would say, even the question like, do you want help? Like just explicitly, like, do you want things to be different or to change? And I think also knowing our limitations, what can I control and what can't I control? What is my responsibility? What isn't my responsibility? What has God asked me to do? What hasn't He asked me to do? So if somebody isn't wanting change, I'm not responsible for somebody else's healing, nor can I actually bring it about. And so maybe that leads me, if I'm feeling helpless, to pray and engage with God. God, help. Give me wisdom. Is there something or someone? And I think utilizing your mentors, the pastors, trusted adults.
That's good. All right, so here's a common one that I get constantly. If a friend wants you to keep their self-harm a secret, what do? I want to help them, but I don't want to lose their trust.
You have to tell an adult. I would start with an adult you trust, and then hopefully that adult will contact your friend's parent. It's not something that they should be keeping a secret. It's not something that you should carry that responsibility for. So you definitely need to talk with an adult.
And I would say, talking with an adult, the risk is that friend might be upset with you. That friend may not talk to you again. That is a risk. But love would call us to help and to speak into it and to tell somebody that can help.
I would say you'll understand that when you parent someday. Some of you that will have kids, is you understand you're going to make decisions for the best, that's best for your kid that your kid will not like. And they might even hate you in the moment because you're making that decision. And I would say that's what real love is. When I just want to be friends with my kids, I don't make good decisions for them because I'm afraid of upsetting them. So I let them do things that I know can harm them. Does that make sense? So I think when you guys reach out to your friends and they get help for you, don't perceive that as hatred or mistrust, but they really do love you. Some of these I'm going to have to probably respond to later because there's so many coming in and they're great questions. I'm going to try and grab one here. Okay. How would you suggest getting help if your parents don't believe you need help? So obviously counseling, therapy, all these things kind of require a parent to assist, and you're in a situation where your parents don't believe that you need help. That's a tough one.
I'll take the first shot at it. Yeah, I think that there's space for you to be able to try and, there's a few things. Trying to sit down and having a honest conversation within your family or with your parents as best as you can be maybe the most influential conversation that you might have as a family in your relationship with your parents. Additionally, I think that it seems to be a common thing that we're talking about, but finding a trusted adult, finding somebody that's within your support structure to be able to have that conversation, to help introduce that topic and be able to ultimately have the conversation with your parents.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to have just a few pastoral reflections for us. So this is about trauma. What are the side effects of trauma that become too much to handle on your own anymore, even if you have already sought help? Okay, so there's like the question of, will I ever fully heal from trauma? So I think it's pretty common now, understanding of how trauma affects the brain and how the brain functions. It's where a lot of our anxiety attacks happen. Is our hope in fully healing or fully recovering from trauma? And maybe someone with more experience can answer that question. I know we have a trauma therapist in the back.
I'd like to hear Vicki's response to this too. I think God can provide healing. That doesn't always mean we're not going to have any effects of trauma that stay with us. Trauma does get kind of buried in your brain, and that's one of the reasons seeking professional help with a trauma therapist can be so valuable. There are techniques that the therapist can work with you on really kind of getting to that deep level of trauma in your brain and body. So I think you can experience a lot of healing, but that doesn't mean you won't maybe still have some emotional effects of trauma in your life. Vicki, do you have anything else you'd like to?
Yeah, I would say it takes time. Like, it just takes time, and I think we want to be better and healed really quickly, and sometimes it takes time. God sometimes works fast, but He always works slow, and we're always, it's a lifetime process of sanctification and being made new. But one day we will be made new, and we will be fully healed. And so, yeah, there's always going to be maybe something that keeps us dependent and needy, and we experience our limitations and our neediness and our brokenness.